You ever get that feeling something massive is about to change, but no one around you seems to notice? That's exactly what was happening the day the file leaked. 1 second, the world was normal, scrolling through videos, laughing at memes, ordering food without thinking. And then boom, the internet exploded. A single thread on an obscure forum, titled in all caps, "Superhuman DNA found government cover-up exposed." At first, it looked fake, just another conspiracy drowning in the digital noise. But within minutes, major creators, journalists, and even doctors were reposting it. Scientists on live streams looked genuinely scared. The file wasn't a hoax. It was real. Inside it were classified documents, full genomic maps, footage of people doing things no human should be able to do. Lifting cars, walking through fire, healing in seconds. And then came the biggest question everyone started asking. What happens when this DNA gets out? If you clicked on this video, it means you're already curious, maybe even concerned. Maybe you saw the headlines and thought, this can't be true. Or maybe something deep down told you it is. Either way, you've landed in the right place. Stay with me, because this isn't one of those videos that teases you with half answers and vague speculation. I'm going to walk you through everything, step by step, not just what was leaked, but who leaked it. Not just what the superhuman DNA can do, but how it's already begun changing people, possibly even you. This is the story no one was supposed to tell, and you're going to get the truth right here. But before we go deeper, I want to talk directly to you. Yeah, you watching this right now. Maybe you're in bed. Maybe you're watching while commuting. Maybe you're just looking for something to fill the silence. But I want to invite you into something bigger. This isn't just a story about leaked files and genetic experiments gone wrong. This is about what happens when we stop being what we are and become something else entirely. I promise, by the end of this video, you'll understand why people are panicking, why governments are scrambling, and why a few quiet, hidden people are smiling. This is a video where you get the answer you came for, but only if you stay until the end. Because the truth isn't just shocking, it's dangerous. And once you hear it, you can't go back. Now picture this, no, feel this, a city just like yours. Lights, traffic, daily routines. But underneath all that ordinary noise, something's shifting. Not in the sky, not in the earth, but in people. A high schooler falls from a 2-story building. Everyone gasps, but he gets up without a scratch. A woman trapped in a fire is found without a single burn mark. A man disappears from a secure lab, except the footage shows him dissolving into thin air. These aren't stories from comic books. They're real reports. But no one's connecting the dots. No one's asking the right question. What's causing this? That's when the name Project Starlight first surfaced. Not in the news. Not on any public database. Just whisper across corners of the web, where you need 3 layers of encryption just to get in. Project Starlight wasn't just an experiment. It was a contingency plan, a biological backup in case humanity ever needed to evolve fast. Funded by a shadow branch of global agencies, they weren't testing chemicals or tech. They were working with pure DNA, recovered from a source never publicly identified. Not alien, not ancient, engineered. And the people exposed to it, they didn't just survive. They changed. The files show early results. Enhanced memory, strength, immune systems that could regenerate cells in seconds. But then came the failures. Minds breaking under the weight of their new abilities. Bodies mutating into something unrecognizable. That's when they shut it down. Burned the labs. Disbanded the team. Or so they thought. One researcher didn't agree, and she kept a copy. Her leak, just a week ago, changed everything. The file contained coordinates to hidden testing sites, names of participants, and the DNA code itself. Freely downloadable, replicable. People online are already running experiments. DIY gene splicing tutorials are trending. But there's a catch. The DNA isn't just enhancing human potential. It's rewriting it. And that's where you come in. Because now the question isn't what happens when the DNA gets out. The question is what happens to us. Will we still be human? Or will we become something else? Stronger, faster, unrecognizable? And if some people get this DNA, what happens to those who don't? Let's talk about Mason, a former paramedic who vanished after responding to an emergency call in New Jersey. 2 weeks later, he reappeared across the country in Arizona with no ID, no memory, but eyes that glowed faintly under infrared. The footage from that day? Sealed, except someone leaked a frame. In it, Mason's lifting a steel beam off a crushed car, alone. That same beam took 5 rescue workers to move during training. Doctors say it's impossible, but they're wrong. Mason's DNA was a match to the leaked genome. He didn't just survive exposure. He became something else. And he isn't alone. There's also Leah, a high school teacher who started experiencing auditory hallucinations, except they weren't hallucinations. She was hearing real-time conversations happening blocks away. She thought she was going crazy. But when she repeated word for word what someone said 3 buildings over, her students stopped laughing. So did the people monitoring her phone. They came for her, but she was already gone. These aren't isolated incidents. They're test cases. And the pattern is clear. The leak was an accident. It was an invitation. But who sent it and why now? You're probably feeling it by now, right? That itch under the surface. The idea that something bigger is happening and no one's being honest about it. That's not paranoia. That's instinct. The same instinct that's kept humanity alive for centuries. But now it's being replaced, enhanced, muted. And if we don't understand what's coming, we won't survive it. Some believe this is the next step in evolution. Others think it's a biological weapon disguised as a miracle. But one thing is certain. This DNA doesn't just change what you are. It changes who you are. And some people are willing to kill for it. Because the secret isn't just in the code. It's in the people who already carry it. The original carriers. And one of them is still out there. Right now. Governments are trying to track down every person who's downloaded the file. Labs are getting raided. Phones are getting cloned. Online accounts are vanishing overnight. But the truth has already spread. And soon, someone, maybe you, will have to choose. Stay human or evolve. And just when you think you know what's coming, everything changes. Because last night, a second file appeared. Not in a forum, not on the dark web, on a public live stream. A countdown, a map, and one message. The world isn't ready, but they're coming anyway. Coming up, we're going to break down what's inside that second leak, who might have sent it, and what one whistleblower said before disappearing. The first phase wasn't about creating superhumans. It was about finding them. And if you're still watching, that means you might already be on their list. The file had barely finished uploading before chaos began to ripple through corners of the internet that most people didn't even know existed. It wasn't just that the contents of the leaked DNA were shocking. It was the implications. Social media didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, it started with encrypted threads, quiet backrooms of private Discord servers, obscure subreddits that had been dormant for months suddenly springing back to life. The ones who knew what to look for, ex-Intel operatives, former military analysts, fringe biochemists, recognized the genetic patterns instantly. This wasn't a normal DNA sequence. It was engineered, impossibly refined, and packed with switches, like someone had programmed it. The original human genome is messy, full of broken codes and evolutionary leftovers. But this sequence? It was clean, precise, designed for enhancement, not survival. And it was waking something up. In the days following the leak, unexplained events started piling up. A woman in Seattle was hit by a delivery van at 35 miles per hour. Security footage showed her flying through the air, only to land on her feet, dazed but unbroken. A teenager in rural Kentucky disappeared from his room during a thunderstorm and was found 15 miles away, barefoot and scathed and completely unaware of how he got there. Hospitals across the country reported anomalous cases, spontaneous cell regeneration, drastically improved reflexes, even incidents of what could only be described as psychic interference. People finishing each other's sentences, predicting events seconds before they occurred, sensing danger with impossible accuracy. And though it all sounded like science fiction, each case traced back to one common factor, the leak. But this story isn't about the file itself. It's about the people affected by it. In the heart of Chicago, A quiet research assistant named Dr. Karis Holloway was the first person to publish an academic breakdown of the genome online. Her analysis was detailed, but cautious. She didn't speculate on the source, only confirmed that no known species matched the structure. Within 24 hours, her office was raided, her devices wiped clean, and her personal data scrubbed from public access. She hasn't been seen since. But someone managed to save her final upload, a heavily compressed video message hidden inside a data cluster titled Echo Protocol. In it, Karis looks scared but determined. She whispers into the camera, "They lied. It's not about evolution. It's about control. And it's already inside us." That video spread fast, first among conspiracy forums, then YouTube, then TikTok. Clips trended under hashtag Superhuman DNA, hashtag DNALeak 2025, and hashtag What Are We Becoming? Influencers started doing reaction videos to it, while biotech enthusiasts tried to break the sequence down on live streams. But behind the noise, a pattern was forming. Certain viewers reported symptoms after watching the footage: light sensitivity, elevated pulse, vivid dreams. Some said they felt different afterward, more alert, more aware. Most dismissed it as placebo. But those who didn't began to gather. A digital collective called The Shifted was born, a group of self-proclaimed, awakened individuals who believed the leak was meant to trigger a transformation in those genetically predisposed to it. They didn't know why or how, but they were convinced the DNA wasn't just code. It was a message. And while they were finding each other, another group was watching, embedded deep within a global agency, simply referred to as a program. A task force was activated the moment the leak hit the surface. Not police, not military, something in between. Their orders weren't to protect the public. Their job was to contain it. Anyone exhibiting signs of enhancement was to be flagged, tracked, and if necessary, removed. The program didn't exist on paper. No logo, no public funding, no official channels. Just a rotating team of specialists trained to operate in the shadows. Their lead, a man known only by the call sign Reed, had been tracking potential subjects long before the leak. But now that it was public, the stakes were higher. Reed knew the sequence wasn't just data. It was a trigger, and someone had pulled it. Meanwhile, in Austin, Texas, 17-year-old Nathan Cole was experiencing things he couldn't explain. It started with small stuff, being able to read pages faster, hear conversations behind closed doors. Then came the dream, a vivid image of a desert compound, a metal door with the number 42B, and the sound of a woman's voice calling his name, Karis's voice. Nathan had never met her, never even watched her video, but when he saw a still from her final message on a friend's phone, something clicked. He wasn't just seeing things. He was being called, and he wasn't alone. Across the country, others were waking up. People from different walks of life who had nothing in common except one thing, a blood marker that matched the leaked genome. Some were activists, some ex-soldiers, some kids just trying to get through high school, but they were all changing. The Shifted believed these individuals were part of the first wave, those genetically close enough to the original source to activate quickly. But no one knew what would happen next. Not the program, not the Shifted, not even the source itself. Because deep beneath the streets of Berlin, in a chamber sealed off since 1983, something was stirring. A vault, buried under layers of surveillance and armed guards, had gone silent. It hadn't been opened in decades, not since the first iteration of the genome was locked away. But now, as the leak spread and the DNA found new hosts, the vault's biometric locks began to flicker green. Sensors triggered. Internal lights blinked to life. And a message, etched into the wall in a language no modern scientist could decode, began to glow faintly, just 4 words. "We never left you." Back in Chicago, a tech journalist named Ray Donovan was following a breadcrumb trail no one else had noticed. In the metadata of the leaked video file, she found a signature, just a tiny string of characters. A3V7X Luma EX01. It matched a long-forgotten project buried in Cold War archives, Luma, a secret joint program between American and Soviet scientists meant to explore biogenic information carriers. No one ever found out what that meant, but now the pieces were fitting. Luma wasn't about discovering alien life. It was about creating it. And the leak? It wasn't a breach. It was a test. Ray's investigation took her to New York, where she tracked down one of the original researchers, an old man named Dr. Vasek, who had been presumed dead since 1991. He lived off-grid, under a different name, and when she confronted him with the file, his hands shook. "They warned us," he said. "The DNA wasn't ours to use. We didn't create it. We just woke it up." When she pressed him on who they were, he only muttered one thing: "They're not gods, but they're not gone." Meanwhile, tension was rising. Cities reported spikes in unexplained violence. Entire neighborhoods experienced temporary blackouts. Always near sites where suspected awakened individuals had been spotted. Security drones began to patrol more aggressively. Newscasts warned against DIY genetic modifications. But underground clinics were booming, offering black market DNA treatments for thousands of dollars. Everyone wanted in, but no one really knew what they were taking. And the ones who were successful, the rare few who didn't suffer catastrophic rejection, were starting to form their own network, completely separate from the shifted. They called themselves Vanta. Not a movement, not a cult. A collective of enhanced humans who didn't believe the DNA was a gift. They saw it as a weapon. A final tool in a centuries-long conflict hidden from human history. Vanta's leader, a woman known only as Sable, claimed to have activated her genome years ago, before the leak. She spoke of visions, of a coming convergence, of ancient memories not her own. To some, she was a prophet. To others, a fraud. But one thing was clear. Sable had power, and she wasn't the only one. As governments tightened their grip and public fear turned into hysteria, one final detail emerged that changed the conversation completely. An anonymous hacker group uploaded footage, grainy, incomplete, but real. It showed a child no older than 10, calmly walking into a burning building and emerging untouched, flames retreating from his skin. His face was blurred, his identity unknown. But the file title said everything. Phase 2 begins. The question now wasn't just how many people were enhanced. It was how many had been born this way. How long had they been among us? And what did Phase 2 really mean? Because according to a hidden memo buried in the Luma archive, Phase 2 wasn't about awakening individuals. It was about awakening something buried deep in Earth itself, something ancient, waiting to be called. And the DNA? It was the key. But the door hasn't opened yet. And what's behind it is still silent. For now, it began subtly. At first, only those deeply embedded in the networks of the shifted in Vanna noticed it. Small interruptions in their communication, encrypted channels mysteriously silent, private GPS signals being rerouted or completely cut off. Then came the vanishings. Entire safe houses emptied in the dead of night. No signs of forced entry, no surveillance footage, nothing but a trace chemical signature in the air that none of the labs could identify. One by one, the most prominent voices in both factions started going dark. Sable herself hadn't been seen publicly in over a week, and her most loyal followers were starting to whisper. Some said she had gone into hiding. Others believed she had been taken. What no one knew, however, was that the source of the disruption wasn't from the program or even from any known intelligence network. It was something else, something older, and it was already inside the system. Ray Donovan had been off-grid since her interview with Dr. Vasek, surviving on borrowed identities and encrypted burner networks, always one step ahead of the people who now seemed to be watching every move. But one night, after connecting a forgotten archive server to her dark fiber terminal, something changed. She didn't mean to find it. It wasn't part of any search query. It simply appeared on her screen unprompted, as if waiting for her, a black window with a single blinking phrase. "Do you remember the signal?" Before she could react, her screen flooded with white noise. At first, she thought it was a hack, until the noise began to shift, forming patterns, waves, pulses that seemed to echo in her head, bypassing her ears entirely. She collapsed. When she woke up, she lost 15 minutes, and her nose was bleeding. But next to her on the desk was something new, a file labeled Third Origin. She didn't remember downloading it, and when she opened it, the contents didn't just rewrite what she thought she knew. They redefined it entirely. The leak wasn't an accident. It wasn't even recent. The DNA had been introduced into the population over 100 years ago in small, silent ways, through vaccines, food chains, even water sources. Generations of silent carriers have been unknowingly passing it on, dormant in their children's cells, waiting for an activation code. What had happened in the past few weeks wasn't a genetic mutation. It was a command, a wake-up signal broadcast not from space, but from beneath the Earth's surface, buried in a resonance frequency never detected by conventional instruments. And the leak? That was the decoy. The real sequence hadn't leaked. It had been activated. As Ray processed this impossible truth, in another corner of the world, something else was breaking loose. Deep in the Arctic Circle, a research outpost called MIR-9 went completely silent. It wasn't military base nor weather station, but something much stranger, a black site dedicated to studying seismic anomalies that didn't behave like natural tectonic shifts. For decades, nothing had happened. But now, with the activation of the sequence, the readings were off the charts. Not just earthquakes, resonant pulses, almost like sonar, but coming from beneath the crust. As the on-site team scrambled to document the event, their instruments picked up a repeating pattern that mimicked the exact wave Ray experienced on her terminal. And before they could report it, the ice beneath the compound cracked open. The last transmission received from MIR-9 was a frantic, garbled message. It's not just alive, it remembers us. At the same time, Nathan Cole's visions were growing stronger. What started as scattered dreams had evolved into fully immersive episodes, where he would lose minutes, sometimes hours, reliving events that didn't belong to him. He saw cities that didn't exist, machines built from elements unknown to modern science, and a sky pulsing with color and energy. But the most terrifying part wasn't the content. It was the familiarity. Somehow, deep inside, Nathan knew he had been there before, and he wasn't alone in this experience. Across the world, others shifted were beginning to share the same dreams. Identical environments, identical landmarks, even identical sounds. A shared memory, embedded in their altered DNA, pulling them toward a convergence point that no one could identify yet. Reed, the leader of the program's tracking force, was losing control. His team, once surgical and precise, had splintered. Some agents had gone rogue, abandoning their missions and disappearing. Others began to exhibit the very symptoms they were supposed to suppress. Faster reflexes, amplified senses, resistance to standard sedatives. The program had underestimated the scale of exposure. Now, even their operatives were potential liabilities, and the higher-ups were panicking. Emergency meetings were held in subterranean command centers beneath Washington, Geneva, and Shanghai. Contingency plans were dusted off, plans that hadn't been updated since the Cold War. But one question kept surfacing, louder each time. Who really activated the sequence? That answer came from an unlikely source. A 10-year-old girl named Mira, whose existence had been carefully hidden by Vanna. She had never spoken a word since birth. Her parents were shifted, but Myra's condition was different. Her genome didn't just match the leaked data. It exceeded it. She had sequences not seen in any other known organism, human or otherwise. For years, she had been kept safe, monitored, studied. But when the activation wave spread, Mira began to speak, in an ancient dialect no linguist could decode. Her voice carried power. Birds stopped mid-flight. Lights dimmed. Electronics shut down. But more than that, she drew others to her. People began having visions of her, without ever meeting her. They painted her face. They heard her in dreams. Mira wasn't just part of the signal. She was the signal's mouthpiece. As Ray tracked Myra's movements through broken chatter and hacked Vanacoms, she realized something terrifying. The third origin file contained a map, a star map specifically. But when overlaid with seismic data, ancient ruins, and unexplained electromagnetic anomalies, it formed a grid, not in space, but on Earth, a planetary web of activation nodes, all converging on a central point, an unmarked location in the South Pacific, deep beneath the ocean floor. Something was buried there, something old, and it was beginning to stir. Meanwhile, Nathan's transformation was accelerating. He no longer needed sleep. He could feel magnetic fields. His skin reacted to sunlight in strange ways, creating small pulses of energy. But with each new ability, his sense of self eroded. He was remembering things, other lives, other voices, languages he had never learned. The convergence wasn't just physical, it was mental. Identity itself was becoming fluid. The shifted weren't evolving. They were returning to something ancient, something forgotten, or buried. But the twist came when Sable finally resurfaced. She appeared unexpectedly during a live-stream hack of the global space surveillance network. The feed cut into major news broadcasts, showing her face surrounded by symbols glowing faintly across her skin. Behind her, the ocean churned, impossibly still in the distance. Her message was short but devastating. "You were taught to fear evolution," she said. "But what you call evolution is only memory resurfacing. We were never human in the way you understand it. We are not becoming gods. We are remembering we were never anything less." The feed cut, and within hours, a chain reaction began. One of the grid points, deep in the Amazon, emitted a pulse that lit the sky like a second sun. It wasn't visible on satellite, only to the shifted. They began to move, pulled like magnets, driven by dreams and instincts that felt older than language. And as the program scrambled to respond, their satellites began going dark, one by one, falling from orbit like stones. Reed received one final transmission from a classified lunar station. The feed showed something rising from beneath the Earth's crust, glowing with symbols identical to those on Sable's skin. And then, silence. The convergence had begun. But this is not the end. Not yet. The events of the last few weeks had set the world on a path no one could have foreseen. The shifted were moving like an unstoppable force, drawn together by the resonance of ancient memories and buried instincts. But even as they converged, even as their power grew, there were questions that still lingered unanswered. Who was pulling the strings? What exactly was the third origin, and how had it remained hidden for so long? The stakes had reached a point where the boundaries between reality and myth were blurred, and every revelation seemed to lead to more questions. Ray Donovan had spent days analyzing the signals, decoding fragments of data, cross-referencing ancient texts, and following the faintest traces left by Myra's presence. What she had found in the depths of those files was nothing short of earth-shattering. The signal, the DNA sequence, the activation code, it wasn't just something that had been hidden. It was something that had been created. Buried deep beneath the Earth's crust was a structure, one far older than human civilization itself. A structure that had once been the cradle of a race long before humanity. These beings weren't extraterrestrial. They weren't even from another time. They were from another dimension, one that existed parallel to our own. They had been the ones to manipulate humanity's evolution, planting the seeds of their own genetic legacy within the human race. The DNA sequence that had been leaked wasn't a mistake. It was a key to unlock a gateway back to their world. The shifted, Ray realized, weren't evolving. They were becoming what they had always been. The emergence of these latent abilities wasn't random or accidental. It was the awakening of an ancient power that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment, the right activation signal to bring it to life. And that moment had come. What seemed like a mysterious scientific breakthrough, an accidental release of classified data, was, in truth, the opening act of something far more terrifying and awe-inspiring. As Ray pieced together this horrifying truth, she learned that Sable had been the one to orchestrate the activation of the signal. She hadn't been an agent of chaos, as many had assumed. She had known exactly what she was doing. Sable had been guiding the shifted toward their destiny, pulling them together like pieces of a puzzle. She had been searching for the key that would unlock the gateway, the point of convergence, and it had been Mira all along. She wasn't just a mouthpiece of the signal. She was a key to activating the final stage of the sequence. But there was something else. A twist no one had anticipated. The convergence, the rising power of the shifted, wasn't merely about unlocking an ancient power. It was about preserving it. The beings who had created the shifted were dying. The world they had once inhabited had deteriorated beyond repair, and they were desperate to return to Earth. But in order to do that, they needed a vessel, a human vessel, one capable of withstanding the transition between dimensions. And that vessel was Mira. Ray couldn't believe it at first. Mira wasn't just the signal's mouthpiece. She was the conduit between worlds. And the more she grew, the more powerful she became, the closer the gateway came opening. But there was no going back. Ray knew that the moment Mira stepped into the center of the convergence, the world would be irrevocably changed. The shifted would become the dominant force on Earth, and humanity, as it had been known, would cease to exist. They would become something else entirely, a hybrid of the ancient beings and modern humanity, a new race that would dominate the planet. The balance of power would shift forever, and there would be no place for the old world. As the shifted made their way to the convergence point, the tension grew unbearable. Even the governments that had been trying to contain the phenomenon began to realize they were powerless. Satellites were failing, communication networks were collapsing, and the sky itself seemed to tremble with energy. It was clear that something monumental was about to unfold, but there was no stopping it now. Ray had a choice. She could try to stop them, try to stop Mira from completing the activation, but deep down, she knew it was futile. The sequence was set in motion. The shifted were unstoppable. Nathan, too, had reached the edge of his own transformation. His powers were growing stronger by the day, but with them came a loss of his identity. He no longer recognized himself. Memories of other lives, other worlds, swirled in his mind, and his body felt like a prison. He was no longer human. The dream of becoming something greater had come true, but at what cost? He stood on the precipice, facing a choice that would determine the fate of the world and the fate of his soul. As the final hours approached, the shifted gathered at the point of convergence, a hidden valley deep within the Amazon rainforest. The air buzzed with electricity, and the ground itself seemed to pulse with an ancient rhythm. Ray and Nathan stood at the edge, watching as Mira stepped forward. Her eyes glowed in otherworldly light. She was the last piece, the final key, and as she approached the center of the convergence, the world seemed to hold its breath. But in that moment, everything changed. Sable, who had been orchestrating the convergence, stepped forward, revealing her true purpose. She hadn't just been guiding the shifted. She had been preparing them for something else, something even more dangerous. The beings who had created the shifted, those ancient, otherworldly creatures, had never intended for them to take over Earth. They had never intended for them to become a new race of beings. They had only ever wanted one thing, to escape. They were dying, but they were not here to coexist. They were here to replace humanity, and the shifted were their vessel. Sable's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. You think you're the chosen ones, but you're not. You're just their pawns, their tools to bring about their return. And once they return, there will be no place for you, no place for anyone. The realization hit like a tidal wave. The shifted had been manipulated all along. Their powers, their abilities, their visions. None of it was real. They were nothing but instruments in a much larger game. And as the truth sank in, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. The convergence had been triggered, but it wasn't going to be what anyone expected. The gateway was opening, but not for the beings that had created the shifted, not for the ones who had planned this entire event. It was opening for something else, something far older, far more powerful. The real force behind the signal was finally making its move. And as the gateway began to shimmer into view, a voice echoed to the minds of everyone present, a voice not of this world. It is time. But that was not the end. In the final moments, everything changed. The sky ripped open. The world stood still. And as Ray and Nathan looked at each other, they knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The final twist? They were not the first to awaken. The first had been Mira, but she was not the last. The first had been the ones who had always been waiting, the ones who had created the shifted, and now they were free. But Ray and Nathan had one final choice, to join them or stop them, and that choice would shape the fate of the world. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and never forget your worth.